see how loud this is. I guess this is where I'm both. Seems reasonable. All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Sounds like a reasonable volume. All right. Had a few technical issues out there. Hopefully, won't have any more. The true expert of technology here is Clay. So, and he's not here at the moment, but we'll get by, I'm sure. All right, we are continuing with our right here, right now themed lesson. So, got this week and next week, so I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to get Esther finished and Ezra and Nehemiah. I probably won't be able to get to Nehemiah unless I give you the shorter version next week, but that'll be all right. We'll get through it. Okay, so we left off in Esther chapter 4. Last week, if you want to go there, we're going to be reading verses from the rest of the chapter of Esther today. Kind of do a quick scan through. And again, Esther is such an easy book to read. It almost reads like a novel. Talked a little bit about this last week, the providence, God's mode of operation. These were through the first 3 chapters of Esther. Queen Vashti losing her position because of her act of rebellion towards a king. Persian officials suggesting a beauty contest, which Esther is going to win. She was the right age. She was the right character. She was beautiful on the inside and outside. She got special treatment. I feel like it's getting feedback on this a little bit. Anyway, her cousin, Mordecai, who was more like a father to her, he had a position in the government as well, and they're just kind of teaming up together to make this all work for God's will. All right. So, chapter 3, again, was about the plot. And just to remind you, Haman is the bad guy here. He's an Agagite, which is a group of people related to the first group that attacked Israel, coming back from Egypt. So they had a long history there, descendant of the Amalekites. And Haman is not just happy with going after Mordecai, he wants to go after all the Jews. So that sets us up for chapter 4. And that's when Esther is asked to step up. So we read through this last week. Again, great verses, great passage, especially when you get into the portion of the chapter where Mordecai is talking to Esther about her role, her position, her purpose, and I'm trying to remember the exact verse it was. Yeah, 13, he sent back this answer, and this is Mordecai talking. Do you think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape? For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your family's father's family will perish. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. In other words, God's will be done one way or the other. God has put you in a position for a reason, and now is the time to make your decision, right? And then Esther's reply is beautiful. Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Esther has stepped up to the call. Esther has met the challenge. She's listened to Mordecai. She knows that Mordecai is right. And that takes us to the end of the chapter. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. So let's go into chapter 5. Right. Yeah, it tells you a lot about their culture. A lot of bravado, a lot of egotistical. And you know, the king, I've seen commentators that feel like he was basically a drunken pushover. I mean, he just kind of followed whatever, didn't really think for himself. But he's in that position for a reason. But if you want to go over to chapter 5, and we're basically gonna go through the end of the chapter, or the end of the book, and these are fairly short chapters, especially chapter 10. Chapter 10, I think it's only 3 verses, but like I said, it's an easy read, it's a quick read, but a lot of good stuff on here. So if you go over to Esther chapter 5, it says the first one: on the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. So this is the 3rd day after she said, let's do this right, let's do a fast, let's get ready for it. So we're going to read through 8. Let's break this up. You see the passages up there. So I'll do 1 through 8. Who wants 5, 11 through 13? Okay, don't make me call you out. Yeah, 11 through 13 for chapter 5. And then we'll go chapter 6, 1 through 3, verse 6, verse 10, and verse 14. Who's got that? John? All those, yeah. Chapter 6. Yeah, the passage in chapter 6. And then we'll go 7. We'll just go from there. So, all right. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half of the kingdom, it will be given to you." Now, what does that bring to mind when you hear him saying that?
Oh, lots of things that you promise you won't be very careful what you do.
Right. What it brings to mind for me was when you fast forward to the New Testament, and King Herod was telling, I can't remember the little girl's name who was dancing for him, right? But basically, you can have whatever you want up to half the kingdom. And she asked for John the Baptist's head, right? So it's just interesting because this isn't the only place you see this type of thing where the king is making all these. It's like, can anybody take anything back here? I mean, once they say it, it's permanent or what? And of course, it's true, because we know that this edict that he issued about the Jews being murdered, he can't just override it. He'll just have to issue a whole new edict to cover that up. But all right, verse 6. If it pleases the king, replied Esther, let the king together with Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared for him. Bring Haman at once, the king said, so that we may do what Esther asked. So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, now what is your petition? It will be given, and what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted. Esther replied, my petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question. So she's putting on a banquet. She's invited two people, the king and Haman. And the timing of this is interesting, because if you're familiar with the story at all, what's going to happen that evening before the next banquet? Someone's going to get some insomnia, right? Yep. So the king is going to get some insomnia. All right. Verse 11 through 13.
Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways that the king had honored him, and how he had elevated him above the other nobles and officials. And that not all, Haman added, I am the person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave, and she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see the Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. Okay, so here's Haman, and he's going home and bragging to his wife and his officials, hey, I got invited to a banquet. And we already know that he had already received other special treatments, but this is the beautiful, ironic twist on this whole story, because here's Haman getting his ego inflated even more, right? But notice what he says at the end of that. But dadgummit, Mordecai still won't bow down to me. So he really can't get past this. And what does he want to do with Mordecai? He wants to put him on a pole, right? So, have a pole set up. This is his wife. In verse 14, have a pole set up, reaching to a height of 50 cubits, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself. This suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the pole set up. So he's going to set up a 50-foot pole to put his bitter enemy on. All right, let's go over to chapter 6.
That night the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthaniah and Thirsa, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered.
All right, so here's the king. He can't sleep. He asked somebody to read some of the readings from the Annals of the King, the Chronicles, and it's a good way to fall asleep, I guess. But then he's like, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Preoccupied with his wars with Greece, he kind of puts this on the back burner as far as honoring Mordecai, and he's like, we never did do anything for this guy, so it's time to do something. Go ahead, John, verse 6.
When Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me?
All right, again, this is setting up this perfect ironic twist, right? Haman thinks this is all about him, and then he's going to find out, not for you. All right, go to verse 10.
Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended.
All right, so Haman, thinking this is for him, says, hey, this guy should get on a royal horse. He should be paraded through the streets. This guy should receive special honor. That's what I think, king. And the king says, do it. Do it for the man. By the way, it's not you. You're going to do this for Mordecai. All right, verse 14, John.
While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared.
All right, so he has to parade his enemy through the streets with a high honor. So you know that is a bitter pill to swallow. But again, you do God's will. You step up to the plate. His plan will be put into practice. His plan will be executed the way it was intended. All right, we're going over to chapter 7 now. Any volunteers? He's got it.
So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given me. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. The Queen Esther answered, If I have found favor with you, O king, and if it pleases your majesty, grant me any life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold for destruction and slaughter and annihilation. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, Who is he? Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing? Esther said, The adversary and enemy is the vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind and begged Queen Esther for his
Yeah.
Just
Damn. Go ahead. Sorry.
as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Habana, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, A gallows 75 feet high stands by Haman's house. He had it made for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. The king said, Hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided.
Okay, so again, what Haman had intended for Mordecai, it gets used against him. So this is,
You reckon he got the point of things?
yeah, I think he got it. And you know, this is a guy that ordered a genocide. Yeah, he wanted the entire Jewish people eradicated. So, and just like it says in chapter 4, God's going to save us one way or the other. It can be you, or it can be somebody else. What's your purpose, or is this your purpose? It is if you step up to the challenge. All right, so we're going to go over to chapter 8 real quick. We'll finish through this. Again, this is the shortened version, but chapter 8, verse 1. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told him how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which had been reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. So Haman's done now, and Mordecai has basically taken his position in the government. All right, continuing on, let's go down to verse 8. So Mordecai has the ring, and this is how they're going to deal with this order that had already been put into place to go after the Jews. Verse 8, now write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked. So again, this edict that had been issued back in chapter 3 about going after the Jews and wiping them out, he can't just revoke it, but he'll replace it with this one. So what are they going to have to do?
You see the correlation between this and Joseph's life?
Oh yeah, definitely. Using, how's the passage go? Using something bad for good. All right, verse 12 of chapter 8. The day appointed for the Jews to do this. Just a minute. Yep. All right, the day appointed for the Jews to do this in all the province of King Xerxes was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. So in other words, they've been told that they're going to defend themselves. They're going to launch a counterattack, so to speak, against those who were going to attack them. So it's not just as simple as the edict is repealed. It's already in place. These people are going to do what they were originally told to do. You're going to get the opportunity to defend yourself. No, and it can't be revoked. That's the whole thing about this Persian Mede law. Yeah, it's just, no. Now, there is, if you read every verse through there, you see that there's a fear of Mordecai, and they start to develop this fear of the Jews because they can clearly see that God's in their favor. So, and that's going to that'll feed into this whole defense of the Jews. All right, chapter 9, verse 1. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the edict commanded by the king was to be carried out. On this day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but now the tables were turned, and the Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. Let me just read through. The Jews assembled in their cities and all the provinces of King Xerxes to attack those determined to destroy them. No one could stand against them because the people of all the other nationalities were afraid of them. So that's what I was referencing right there. And all the nobles of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and the king's administrators helped the Jews because fear of Mordecai had seized them. Mordecai was prominent in the palace. His reputation spread throughout the province, and he became more and more powerful. The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. In the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. They also killed Parshatatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Paratha, Adela. I'm just going to skip through those names. The 10 sons of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. Okay, so this is clearly stating this was all about defending themselves. They're not out to get treasure. It's God's answer to their request. All right, so just a little Jewish holiday here. This is setting up the Jewish festival of Purim. Pur was the Hebrew word for die, so they cast the die to determine the date of when the Jews were going to be wiped out. So this happens late winter, early spring. So this is still celebrated to this day, the Festival of Purim, to celebrate when they were in Babylon in captivity and defended themselves against genocide. This year, I think I read that it's going to be celebrated on March 2nd and 3rd. It's a 2-day celebration. But, all right, let's go to the last chapter of Esther and the last verse. Wrap this up. Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. So I know that's kind of a quick run through the rest of the story. We kind of hung out in chapter 3 and chapter 4 there for a while. Yes, ma'am. Hmm?
Didn't realize this until I did a little deeper study that they separated themselves from the Jews. They did not return when they couldn't. They were frowned upon for that, for not going back.
The Jewish people that stayed, the ones that didn't go back with the Zerubbabel and all of them, a lot of them did stay. A lot of them had comfortable lives there.
Yes, so even though they separated themselves from God's people, He still used them for good.
Right. But you also see in Esther that they kept themselves. In fact, that's what Haman said in chapter 3. This group of people, they keep themselves separate. In fact, so even though they stayed, they were still true to their identity. They were still worshiping God. They were still, and you can tell by what Mordecai says to Esther and how he raised her and everything else, that they're still true to God, even though they're staying in Babylon. So, yeah. So, good point there. And again, like I said, Esther, it's an easy read. It's a great read. And again, you want to look at where you see the gospel in the book of Esther. God can use people in the most secular, hostile to faith places. For example, Joseph, Daniel. God uses people everywhere, not just out in the mission field, not just in church, but anywhere you are. Esther leverages her celebrity status in order to help her people. To be faithful as Christians, wherever you are in culture, you have to be willing to give up the palace if necessary. So she was willing to give up the palace, so to speak, and so was somebody else, right, down the road. Call him Jesus. God's work through events and circumstances in this life and how He uses these to provide for, care for, and increase the number of His people. That's providence right there. All right, and that puts into mind, for me at least, Romans chapter 8. And of course, you've got Romans 8:28, which says God works for the good of those who love Him. But Romans 8:37 through 38. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through Him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God. Okay. Now I know that was a real quick run through the book. Could have used a little more time, but that's all right. So, got a video for y'all this week about the hiddenness of God. Now, this is an interesting video. It pertains to, people often question, is God really, why doesn't God make Himself more obvious? Why does God not reveal Himself more clearly in often cases? And you see a lot of people ask this when they're struggling with their faith. right? So this video, there's a young man here, and I've kind of cut some parts of the video out just for time's sake. But there's a young man here that's asking about, he's an agnostic. He grew up in the church, but he's an agnostic. He's struggling with his faith, and he's asking about this whole hiddenness of God. And Esther is a great book, of course, for the hiddenness of God. The ways of God that is not always so obvious, except in hindsight, right? In hindsight, we can see, oh yeah, God's hand was all over this. But we're going to watch this video, and I think you should see that this is a good application of what we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. All right, Mike, I think you're going to have to push the button there. Now click, there should be an arrow. Not there. And who knows, I might not have downloaded it right.
My biggest regret was serving in the Vietnam War after discovering how the government is infecting people with Alzheimer's. An independent investigation has finally revealed the true cause behind dementia, and it has nothing to do with age, genetics, or bad.
My question is, have you heard of the problem? So, I guess as background, how do you reckon with his creation, but surmount any barrier?
Let me just take the hiddenness of God.
Hard to reconcile. How would you reconcile that?
Okay, yeah, good question. Snellenberg has written much on this, the hiddenness of God. There are many different ways to address this issue, but let me just take one or two ways. It could be that God doesn't want you to become a believer right now. Let me give you an example of someone very prominent. There's a friend of mine who lives in Nebraska he's a Christian apologist, and he had another friend that wasn't a Christian, and he wanted this guy to be a Christian, so he actually gave him my book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And the guy said, I'm not reading that. That was written by a Christian. Well, yeah, of course, a Christian believes it, so he's going to write it. But they lost touch. 10 years later, my friend sees this guy, and he's a Christian. And he goes, what happened? He goes, I've been watching Jordan Peterson. And Jordan Peterson led me to Jesus. Jordan Peterson's not a Christian. And the reason that he's been watching Jordan Peterson is because he considered Jordan Peterson kind of an honest broker. Like he doesn't have a horse in this race. He's just trying to find the truth himself. And Jordan Peterson, being a non-Christian, helped lead this guy to Jesus when a Christian couldn't do it. So it's possible that maybe you're in that same position. Maybe you have people in your life and your circle of influence is going to expand, maybe years from now, to the point that it's big enough where God goes, okay. What's your name again? Luke. Luke, you're ready now. Now, I'm going to reveal more of myself to you, and now you're going to be able to influence these other people in your circle that wouldn't have been there if you had become a Christian 10 years ago. That's a possibility.
Yeah. The problem I found is that, I get much the same answer from a lot of my Christian friends who I've talked to is, God works in his own time. Many years from now, you could be a Christian. The problem I find with that is, like, all it takes is one person who is in my circumstance, who goes to their grave without finding the truth and love of Christ, for that to seemingly fall apart.
Okay, Luke, I'm not saying this is the case with you, but I'm saying it's the case in general with humanity. We all have a deceitful heart. We might not even know why we do half the things we do. We might say we're completely open, and in the recesses of our hearts, we're not.
Mm-hmm.
There's something between us and the truth, and we don't really want to accept the truth. In fact, let me ask you this. What is your, according to what you believe, is your objection to Christianity evidence-based or something else?
It's an interesting question. I'd say it was probably primarily evidence-based, but in more recent reflection, it's kind of occurred to me that you can't talk somebody into the faith no more than you can, like, talk somebody out of it. Like, that kind of has to be a more deeply felt spiritual realization. And, I have all of these kind of arguments rolling around in my head and tons of research I've done, but ultimately it appears to me that I would just have to have had an experience of God. And it's crazy because, I grew up in the exact circumstances where that should have happened, and it was happening to everyone around me, and yet I got nothing. Or maybe I don't know, maybe I did get something and I didn't see it, but if I was meant to see it, I would have, I suppose.
Yeah, perhaps, or maybe it hasn't happened yet. Jesus says, keep knocking, keep seeking. Sometimes the process of becoming a Christian is necessary to make you a deeper person when you become a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're going through these doubts and these struggles because 5 years from now you're going to become a Christian, and then you're going to have a ministry to people who go through doubts and struggles. So just to say that, God, you haven't shown me yet, so you must not exist, is very presumptuous.
Sure.
Okay? God does work on his own time.
Mm-hmm.
And he's working through people like Jordan Peterson, even though Jordan Peterson, at least to this point, is not a Christian, and maybe God doesn't want him to be a Christian just yet. So I would say just be open, keep seeking. And let me say one other thing about this. Your psychology, my psychology, is not going to tell us what's true outside of our skull.
Mm-hmm.
Our psychology can deceive us. In fact, our psychology is such that we'll actually ignore evidence for irrational reasons. Let me give you an example. There are probably people in this room that cannot get on an airplane. You're scared to death to get on an airplane. Yet from an evidence perspective, the safest way to get anywhere is on an airplane. You should be more afraid to get in your car than to get on an airplane, because statistically, aviation is the safest way to get anywhere. Here we are allowing our psychology to overpower the evidence. Mm-hmm. Could that be the case when it comes to belief in God? Sure, it could. This is why James says, he who continues to doubt is tossed to and fro as if you're on a ship in a storm. And C.S. Lewis writes pretty profoundly on this. Have you read Mere Christianity?
Mm-hmm.
He writes pretty profoundly on this when he says, there were times when I was an atheist where Christianity just looked all too true. And then there have been times when I've been a Christian when I had such severe doubts. And he said that's where faith comes in, meaning trust, not blind faith. After you've established through reason that Christianity is true, you need to tell your doubts to get off, because you've already established that it's true by looking at the evidence. And the evidence doesn't change. Your psychology can change with the weather, or the bad pizza you had earlier today, or the fact that your favorite football team, the Dallas Cowboys, lost, right? Thankfully again. Your psychology will not necessarily tell you what's true about what's outside your skull. The evidence will. That's why you got to concentrate on the evidence.
Sure.
All right? Thank you,
Thank you.
Luke. Appreciate it.
All right. Fun with technology. So there's quite a bit in that video to kind of process and think about. Some good points made in there. And really that's what a lot of people struggle with these days, is some of the things that young man was talking about. Any comments, questions about Brown? It's 2-minute warning. About the content of that, or what we've been talking about. What's that?
Esther.
Oh, Esther. Yeah, Esther's a good one. Now, with that being said, we're going to go back to Jerusalem now. So obviously next week we'll get back to this. But again, just to show you our roadmap, where we've been, where we're going. First 6 chapters of Ezra, we started talking about that back in December. That was the story of Cyrus allowing the Jews to go back to Jerusalem, and Zerubbabel and his fellow Jews will go back and rebuild the temple. And then the last couple of weeks we've gone back to Babylon to look at the story of Esther and the hiddenness of God. And now we're headed back to Jerusalem. Remember, there's about a 60-year gap between the 6th chapter of Ezra and the 7th chapter of Ezra. So that's why we went Ezra, Esther, and back to Ezra. So Ezra and, of course, Nehemiah and Ezra were all one book at the same time. So those stories are all tied together. So chapter 7 of Ezra, 7 through 10, which is the end of the book of Ezra, is going to get into the story of the priest Ezra and his efforts to bring back the word, so to speak, to those Jews. All right, so I guess we'll leave off there. Next week I don't know that we'll get to Nehemiah, but we'll definitely take a look at Ezra. Appreciate it.